In today's clip, I will talk you through how I draw a skull from a reference image from side view and front view. I will take you step by step through how I use grid lines or guidelines, and these guidelines are similar to the guidelines that I used in my portrait series. So let's get on with the clip. So I'm going to start the guideline sketching process by drawing a circle for the front facing skull and an oval for the side facing skull. The reason that these shapes are different is as you view a head or a skull from the side and the front, the proportions are slightly different. And I'm now sketching on the front facing skull a line down the centre and then halfway again. And the reason for that will be when we start sketching in all of the physical aspects of the skull. I'm now sketching in the eye sockets and a socket for the nose, and obviously these are larger than an eye because you're allowing for all of the areas around the bone rather than the eye, which is smaller because you're giving the impression of the eye with just the eye rather than that whole eye socket area which holds all of that matter that is around the eye. If you remember, we drew a line in between the central line and the edge line. That was because that is a guideline for where you draw that area that goes from the cheek and the area that is that cavity where the teeth are. So that's where you should sketch that line. I'm then sketching the bone structure around the cheeks, and bear in mind that I am drawing from a reference image, so this might seem a little bit non-symmetrical. And that's because I'm drawing directly from reference. So that would be why. When you look at a face or a skull, it is slightly non-symmetrical. Anyone's face is not symmetrical, but sometimes if someone's drawing a cartoon skull, they will draw it symmetrical because that's what their intentions are, and they sometimes aren't drawing from reference. But if you want to use one of the reference images, please look at the description below and you will find them there. I would suggest that you do draw from reference if you're drawing a skull, because then you will see all those fine details, and also you can find all of the areas on the skull that you wouldn't find if you were drawing it from your imagination. I'm now sketching in where the teeth will go and the areas at the side of the teeth, and just sketching in lightly where all those areas are going. Now I'm using a mechanical pencil for this initial sketch because I want to get those details in really well, and you'll see that I'm going around and I'm rubbing areas out with my kneadable eraser, because when you're drawing a portrait or anything like this which is detailed and it has to be in the right proportions, then obviously everything has to be in the right place. You will see also that I have drawn lines going directly from the right hand skull to the left hand skull, and that's because some of those areas will match. Say for example the eye sockets, they will be in the same place, so it's a good idea to have those, and then you can have them the same size. Also, if you're using the reference image, I change the angle of the left hand side one because obviously that skull is resting on the table and I'm trying to give the impression of it being on the actual neck of a skeleton, but also so that it relates to the one on the right hand side. Another reason why it's good to use a reference image, especially for a side view, is for those details that are quite hard to get from memory, like the zygomatic arch, which is that area that I'm rubbing out now. I had to go back to that a few times because I wanted it to be perfect, and it's quite hard to get. You can't get that from imagination really. That's the area that goes around the eye. The RAMUS, which is the top of that jawbone area, and the mandible, which is the area that kind of curves around the teeth. So if you're going to get all those areas perfect, then really you do need a reference image, because each person's skull essentially is different. Okay, they're going to have little cracks on them, little turnings, etc. They're going to be slightly different, so you can't really do that from imagination. I find using a reference image is much easier, and the reference image that I found luckily had the side of the same skull, so if you wanted to use that, you'll find that in the description below. So I'm now going in with a B pencil. I don't want to use a 2B or anything darker. I could use a 2B for the eye sockets just to get it that bit darker, but I just want to go in at the moment, add some subtle tones. I'm using the overhand grip on the side because I don't want to get it too dark at the moment. So I'm just going in with the side of the pencil really lightly, shading in a rounded direction to echo the rounded tones of the skull, and I'm carrying on and adding with the tip of the pencil in the darker areas. So when shading in the cavities, you can maybe put a little bit more pressure on. I'm shading really lightly, but now I'm going into the cavities. I'm using the tip of my pencil just to give it a bit of a darker tone. So now I'm sketching in the teeth. I would suggest you have a very sharp pencil, or at least a mechanical pencil, and make sure that you are sketching very lightly initially, just to make sure that you have your teeth in the right place. And then I will go in between all of those teeth and add a little dark area just to indicate that there is a gap in between those teeth. For the last stage of shading this profile skull, I thought I might include the reference image. Now it's at a strange angle, it's at the angle that the photograph was taken, but as I said to you, I turned the image round. So I thought it might be worth doing this just to show you how dark some of the areas are, because I've noticed with some observational studies or some how to draw tutorials that they don't shade it in as dark, but if you look at the reference image, the shades are quite dark, so that's why I've decided to shade it in, especially if I'm asking you to draw from reference. That would be good for you, and some of the shading is actually darker in some areas, and I could have probably spent a bit more time, especially on that area around the eye, on the zygomatic arch. I could have probably spent a bit more time toning that in, but I just wanted to give you in this tutorial a brief indication of how to draw a skull, and if you want to spend a bit more time toning that in, that's fine. I could also have maybe gone round with my blending stump and smoothed it down a bit more, but I hope this has been an indication of how you can add those tones to make your skull look realistic. So I'm now going to go in with the right hand skull, the front view, and start adding all the details to that. Adding in the teeth again with the mechanical pencil, because then it's super sharp and you can get the details again all the way along, double checking from my reference image, rubbing out any details. And even if you're an experienced drawer, you will find that you are rubbing things out all the way, because you're checking and looking. Is everything in the right place? Especially if you're drawing something in proportion, that's what you do. And then when I've done that, I'm happy with it. I'm going to rub out my guidelines, especially with it being a skull, you will see those guidelines. And then I'm going to start sketching with the B pencil all of the dark areas first. And as I've said, we're using the reference image. I will add the reference image on the right hand side so you can see how dark all those areas are. And I am all the way making sure that my marks are in a rounded direction, because obviously that's going to emphasize those rounded areas of the skull. So now I'm shading in the cavity between the maxilla and the ramus. I am going to use the tip of my pencil because I want to make sure that this is the darkest area possible. I'm still using the B pencil, but I don't want this to be too dark. And I'm obviously now going into the eye socket. And when I go into the nose socket, I will add that area that is the line going down the centre. I'm not going to add those little areas around it because, as I said, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. I don't want to add too much detail. I'm trying to keep this sketch quite simple today. If I wanted to go detailed, then really it wouldn't be for beginners. So if you want to go more detailed, that's fine. You have those reference images. So if you want to go more detailed, that's fine. But I'm trying to keep this a kind of beginner's intermediate drawing. Adding more detailed because it's reference, so it's not a cartoony image. This is more a observational drawing. It's what we call it, observation, because you're drawing from observation, which means you're drawing a reference image, which means you're going on to doing more realistic drawings. I think if we're doing cartoony, it means that it would look more perfect, more symmetrical, and as I said earlier, a skull or a portrait is never symmetrical. That's why this eye on the right hand side is slightly well, it's not smaller, but it's not the exactly mirror image of the one on the left hand side. you enjoyed this clip, then make sure you check out more clips like this in the Drawing Basics or Portrait playlist. Don't forget to look in the description below for details of products used in today's clip, and if you have any ideas for content or questions, leave a comment below. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future content. Also, you can now check out my Patreon for exclusive content including real-time content and more.